Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats.
The hotter it gets outside, the deeper we're getting into a TV show inside. And guess what? If you're within the sound of my voice, guess what? That means you're still in the seats with once more. As always, my name is Dave Voigt, and I'm the host of this podcast where we sit down with a wide-ranging variety of entertainment industry professionals. We pick their brain about current projects, state of the industry, how they got started, and so very much more in a light and in a conversational fashion. And you know, if you like how we do things around here, I'm going to go out on a limb and assume that you do, because let's face it, you're listening right now. And if you are listening, then subscribe. Hit the subscribe button, give us your 5-star rating on your podcast provider of choice. We're available pretty much everywhere. Places like Apple, Amazon, Spotify, Google, and plus we archive every single one of our episodes over at our In the Seats YouTube channel, so you can give us a like and subscribe there as well. We would absolutely appreciate it. Also, don't hesitate to check us out on social media. We're on the Facebook, the Twitter, the Instagram, the Letterboxd, the TikTok, the Threads, and probably a few other places that I'm forgetting. And In the Seats for all sorts of fun updates. But finally, and I do dare say most importantly, please pay us a visit over at In the Seats, intheseats.ca, for all the latest and greatest from the world of film, television, basically the moving image at large. Because guess what? If we love to watch it and write about it and talk about it, we love it even more when you come by and read about it and listen about it. So please do us that kindness. Come on by, give us a bookmark, and pay us a visit. On this episode, we're still in the world of Silo, which is on Apple TV Plus. Now, if you haven't already signed up for that service, go do it now. It's a great show. It's a great service. Do it. Have fun with it, because we certainly do. But we are talking with yet another member of the team behind this fantastic show. We were talking to one of the production designers, Mr. Gavin Bocquet. I apologize if I mispronounced that correctly or incorrectly, but just we talk a little bit about world building and just sort of having to sort of make something from nothing and really make these sort of fantastic, structures that sort of half exist, but also have to exist digitally as well, because you're never going to build the whole thing. And I mean, there's practicality, there's science, there's computers, there's a lot of really dynamic stuff going on, because I mean, as we always say here, to make these movies and television shows that we love so very much, it takes a village, and these people are very important parts of that village. These artisans work their asses off. But like I said, go enjoy Silo. It's a great show. Like I said, we deep dived a bit on the behind the scenes. It's on Apple TV Plus. But first, enjoy our talk with Gavin about the production design on the show, because quite frankly, it's a darn good show, and it's a darn good conversation. Obviously, just to kick it off officially, I mean, thank you so much for the time today, and then just congrats on your work on Silo. I just think it's absolutely fantastic.
No, funnily enough, I'm just doing because I think the show missed last year's Emmys, so this year we're up for it. We're not nominated or anything, but you have to fill in so many things for these possible awards. I have to do a whole list of every set we did on 3 episodes.
Oh, wow.
And it was a year and a half ago. And I'm trying to remember. What was that? Was that? But, I've got my mentors, Stuart Craig and Norman Reynolds, very good production designers. They were many nominations in the 80s and 90s. I'm sure they didn't have to do all this for that. I think in those days, people either looked at something and liked it and they voted for it, and that was it.
It's much more tactical now, isn't it? You got to get into the minutiae.
Well, I suppose it all gets involved with the marketing and the studios. They want, and you sort of almost have to do it to be part of it. So look, I'm not complaining. I'm smiling doing it, but it is hard when it's like a year and a half ago that you actually finished.
Well, I mean, I guess that's a perfect way to spin into my first question, because I mean, I'm always curious on jobs like this, because there's such world building that has to go on. I can imagine you had to be sort of involved from minute one in terms of when this really started to get off the ground.
Yeah, it's interesting because my first call is from the agent, and then it set up a call with Graham Yost, the showrunner writer, and Morton Tilden, the first director, showrunner director. And it's interesting, before most of those meetings and interviews you do try and put a few ideas together, just to show a bit of enthusiasm to do, for the work. And we then, once the job happens, we then spent about probably 4 to 6 weeks of a sort of concept, like a soft concept period with myself and 4 or 5 other concept artists, and we're developing, just throwing ideas around. But when I look back at after we'd finished the show, I look back and some of the first ideas I put down for my interview ended up being where we went. It's quite interesting. Your instinct, sometimes your instinct for an idea is probably, you can have too long to think about things sometimes.
Well, yeah, no, that's an interesting point, because I mean, in my brain, it's like, if you're getting pitched a job like this, like, you're finding the source material, you're looking at the books, but I mean, I can imagine, especially when you don't necessarily have a visual frame of reference, sometimes your gut is probably just the best way to go.
Yeah, I mean, you've got the first, not the worst day, but the most interesting day is the first day when you really got a blank piece of paper. I mean, that's sort of what it is. And I say, my mentor, Stuart Craig, he always told me when I got my first design job, that you can't do it all on the first day. You can't fill that blank piece of paper up. You just have to basically schedule your time, your design time, from big to big until you start getting into the details. So it sounds like obvious advice, but when you're new to that world and somebody gives you that advice, that's like just worth so much.
For sure. Now, I mean, especially on a job like this, because I mean, I just had the privilege of talking with Daniel in VFX on the show, and I mean, especially on a show like this, it really does feel like you guys kind of have to work together, because you have to
I think,
and then it goes to another point.
No, I was joking with him the other day, because we both luckily got a BAFTA nomination, and I was joking with him that really there should be a separate award. There should be something that joins us together, in the world of awards.
For sure,
it's
yeah.
Sort of like, it's we might be on at the beginning in the pure conceptual way, but then just understanding how it's all put together visually, so that it's basically seamless. I mean, that's what you're aiming for.
Yeah.
We know there's always this magical line where we stop and visual effects take over. And there's no written theory about that. That's all to do with the scenes, how long they are, what they are, how big the space is. But it's a very much a combined effort. And sometimes when obviously I knew what we'd built. I mean, obviously we took a lot of effort building a lot of stuff. But when I looked at the show, sometimes I had to remind myself, well, where did we stop and where did Daniel take over? It was that good, in terms of, it was not obvious that here's a big set, we built this bit, they built that bit. It was like, oh, okay. So even for me to miss, not remember or notice where we'd stopped and Daniel took over, that's quite a good plus for both of us.
No, I mean, I'm curious, how does the job evolve from sort of set to set, job to job? Because I can imagine Silo would be different from, say, Dark Crystal would be different from the bank job, which is a period piece.
No,
like,
of course.
how does the evolution of it all sort of fluctuate?
Yeah, I mean, you've chosen two. I mean, obviously, Dark Crystal and Silo were very much studio based.
Yeah,
I think very amusingly, I think on Dark Crystal we had one afternoon location shoot in the car park. And on Silo we had one day location shoot at a cucumber farm, which was where they come out of the silo and they're in the ground. But then obviously the bank job, which is a much lower budget and location. I think if there is a location side to the show, which there usually is, your first instincts are, what can we find on location? What is possible to find? And then you can develop what you might need to add to that location, or what you can't find you're going to build. But when you're on Dark Crystal or Silo, you know that everything is stage bound and you're sort of hand in hand with visual effects. And, even going back to the original Dark Crystal, I was working, but I was in the same studio, actually. I just started my first job. But then you go back to, Gone with the Wind. And although they're doing matte paintings and foreground miniatures, it's the same process of trying to establish what the overall view is. And then how do you break that down? The visual effects side just gives you, well, in theory, you can change every pixel of every frame, but it's not a cheap option. It's not,
well, yeah.
It's not, that's not a magic wand of we can do anything we want. It's all, it's getting the balance between what we build. I think Daniel would agree. Visual effects companies will always tell us build as much as you can. That's always their sort of rule, because whatever we don't build, they have to build.
Is there a preference on your end from like something like this where really you're starting from zero at the base and going up versus say something like a Star Wars where sort of the rules are kind of already in existence?
I think that the overall answer to that is, people say, what would you like to do next? Say, if
Yeah.
you ever had a choice, is always something different, really. And what we're on at the moment is Citadel 2, which Joe Russo is directing all the episodes,
Oh,
and
fantastic. Yeah.
and that's primarily a location show. It's contemporary, it's a spy thriller, so in one sense it's a completely different mindset to Silo, but your end goal is still to produce sets or locations that help move the story along and tell the story and bring the characters to life. So, but I obviously on this one I'm doing a lot more location scouting and working out what we have to build and what we don't have to build. Where Silo, the challenge was, in some senses, we had to design, well, we had to design a whole world. Quite interesting when you look back. It's funny, when you start, the panic, it sort of hits. It's only after 4 or 5 weeks that maybe you get some handle on, yeah, we can do this. But the first 4 or 5 weeks, it's, well, this is 10 episodes, everything built and constructed with visual effects. That's quite exciting, but nerve-wracking at the same time.
Well, I can imagine because the title of production design often feels a little vague and nebulous at times. I can imagine there's a lot that kind of falls under your umbrella when it comes to responsibilities for how everything's going to end up looking.
Yes, I suppose,
Yeah.
people often ask what is that title, and it's a strange title that's evolved from from previous periods, because of course it doesn't include lighting design and it doesn't include costume design, but production design, if you really took it out of context, would you think it was everything? But obviously, I think in the past the unions have thought about changing it to set design or but it doesn't really work, because what I think it is, I say in very simplistically to friends, and it's basically helping create everything you see apart from the actors. That's sort of what it is. So whether it's a background, a foreground, a mid-ground, whether it's visual effects, you're helping to conceptualize that, but in a practical way as well. It's interesting. I might be doing a little bit of work for Skydance Animation on an animation show, just as a little bit of concept work. And of course, they have no restrictions on what you build. I mean, it's a digital animation world.
Yeah.
Where I was explaining to Bob Scanaway, the director there, that half of my brain is thinking, what can we fit in a stage? What can we build and what can we afford? So it's interesting. To answer your question, it's always nice to do something different the next job.
Well, and with animation, you don't have to worry if the camera movie's going to run into this desk or this pillar or that kind of thing. You can just sort of work around it.
Yeah, it's funny because they had long conversation. I could probably have a whole other conversation with you about that, about the separation, because I'm just learning their world a little bit and they're looking at our world, but they try to treat the sets as though they are physical, because they do them all digitally, obviously, to start with. So they try to make sure the camera moves would work in a physical environment. But interestingly, of course, we can float walls and wild walls anyway, so we cheat that as well. We do both things. So no, the excitement, I suppose, is each project can be different and all applying the same criteria. But and of course, it's also about who you work with. Directors like Morton Tilden and Graham Yost, the show, they're so enthusiastic about the project, you can't help but just go along with it and join them on that amazing journey.
For sure. No, I'm curious. Just let's put a bow on this. It's a silly one, but I always like to ask it. Like, was there like what got you into this business? Like, was there a moment that sort of got your foot into the door that made you want to do this, or?
Well, I think if you go back, in my long career, I started in the late 70s, early 80s, and in the UK at that time there was no real serious education into film design. There was theatre design. It wasn't really an option at school. Nobody said, would you like to be a production designer? But I remember that the film that I really picked up on was 2001. I mean, that was my 13, 14-year-old self going to the movie and going to see that film 5 or 6 times in the first week. So although there was that interest, there was nothing in school that really said the film business. So I did 3D design like product design and then 3D design at the Royal College of Art. And in my last 2 weeks, so that was 3 years postgraduate, in my last week, Stuart Craig, very well-known designer, a good mentor, my mentor really, he had been at the Royal College of Art 10 years previously, and he was just starting to design his first production, Saturn III, with Kirk Douglas and Farrah Fawcett Majors. And it was sort of Star Wars hadn't come out, but there was a sort of thought that Stuart was quite open, that he felt like a product designer or a 3D designer would be good at designing hand props, that sort of, the proppy side of things.
For sure.
And he literally put up a handwritten note on our notice board at the Royal College saying, anybody wanting to design props for a science fiction film.
Love it.
So, I thought, I didn't know, is that painting flats? Is that whatever? So I did that. Then he did Elephant Man. I went on to Elephant Man, and then Stuart was going off to do Gandhi, and I was too junior to go to India. So he put me in touch with Norman Reynolds, who was just starting up Jedi, and I managed to get onto Jedi. So I think a lot of people of my generation, they stumbled into the film business. They always liked it, but there was no obvious avenue. But to be honest, most people that come and see us now, like juniors, they've all done a media course, a film course, a design course, a graphics course. And that's great. They all come with a certain skill base. So I think you could probably write a charity book. People could, how I got into the film business. There'd be so many different stories. If you want to generate anything like that, I'm happy to be involved in it.
Absolutely. That's a good idea. But I mean, obviously, Gavin, I've been an admirer of your work. Particularly some of your earlier stuff like Kafka and Radioland Murders, just because it allowed sort of the environment to become a character. And I think you get a lot of that here on Silo as well. And it's fantastic.
And it's very kind of you. And I think a lot of us, fall into what comes next, that bit of synchronicity about sliding doors moments and things opening. And, with Kafka, which sort of, although the film wasn't that successful, everybody wanted to see Steven Soderbergh's second film, like directors and producers. So, and it looked good, Walt Lloyd, the DP, and it had everything about it, and it didn't quite work. It was a bit of a flawed movie, but that's not a bad thing. And that gave me a bit of a calling card, and that was a bit of fortune as well, because I was doing a TV series in Hong Kong, my second design job, and the first series came out. It was a bit like Miami Vice in Hong Kong, but the second season got pulled after 6 weeks. I was only out in Hong Kong after about 6 weeks. And when I came back, my agent saying that Steven Soderbergh is looking for somebody who hasn't designed a film before. Okay, put me forward. But it was done under Baltimore Pictures, who were Barry Levinson and Mark Johnson, and I'd worked with them in the art. They did Young Sherlock Holmes,
right?
So they sort of remembered me with Norman Reynolds. So, those nice things. We all need people to help us along the way. You just need someone to say, yeah, why don't you try Gavin, or why don't you try Mark? So you always really, it's funny, I contacted Mark Johnson about a year ago. He was in Prague doing something. And I said, look, I'm getting to that age. I'm getting quite reflective. I'd really like to, get in touch with Stephen and just really thank him for giving me that chance. Because sometimes those things happen and they just sort of whiz by.
Yeah.
So I did write to him via Mark and said, look, so it's got a really nice email back. And interestingly, he has re-edited Kafka.
I've seen it. I'm in Toronto. I got to see it.
So where did you see it?
At the festival a couple of years back.
Oh,
it was a one-off screening. I absolutely loved it.
Oh, I've seen it on YouTube where he's talking about it on stage. Was that the one you were at?
Yes. Yeah.
Wow. And it's a silent. It's black. Is it black and white? No, it's not. No, it's a silent movie, isn't it?
Yes. There's some splashes of color. It's still mostly black and white, but I think he's saving it for an eventual Criterion Blu-ray. But honestly, Gavin, just keep up the interesting work, man. You really add layers to the stuff that I do and love.
Look, we all make it. It's nice. The truth is, we make it up as we go along.
Don't we all, brother? Don't we all? But I'm honestly, Gavin, again, thank you for the time. I appreciate this.
Brilliant. All right. Nice to talk to you.
Nice to talk to you. And don't forget to visit our friends over at Bay Street Video for all your DVD, Blu-ray rental, or purchasing needs this summer, as they are still open for curbside and some mailing delivery as well. Over at 1172 Bay Street, Toronto, Ontario, Canada, you can give them a call at 416-964-9088. That's 416-964-9088. Or send them an email at baystreetvideoto@gmail.com for any of your DVD and Blu-ray needs.